So hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to EcoResolution. Today I'm speaking with Merlin Sheldrake, who is a biologist and a writer and has a background in plant sciences, microbiology, ecology, and the history and philosophy of science. And Merlin has got a new book out called The Entangled Life: How Fungi Makes Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures. And it's a book that takes us on a magical journey deep into the roots of nature, the mycelial universe that exists under every footstep we take in life. And it's a book which provides the means to recognize the web of wonder that surrounds us. And Merlin, it's a real honor to be joined by you today. And I always want to speak to you, but I especially want to speak to you this month because we're exploring through EcoResolution our relationship with nature, and perhaps how the psychological separation, because obviously we're not physically separated from nature, even if we pretend to be in our buildings, but like the psychological separation that we've kind of created in culture, how that perhaps lies at the root of our climate and ecological crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for being here. How are you?
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Yeah, I'm well, thank you.
So if you don't mind, I would love to read the first paragraph of your book, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about it and we can unpick it together. Can I just ask, I pronounce it fungi or fungi? Does it matter?
You can do it as you wish. I say fungi, but many people say fungi and many people say fungi as well. So it's up to you.
What did you say? Fungi?
I say fungi, but there's no right or wrong here.
Okay, it's my dyslexia paranoia coming out there. Okay, so fungi are everywhere, but they are easy to miss. They are inside you and around you. They sustain you and all that you depend on. As you read these words, fungi are changing the way that life happens, as they have done for over billions of years. They are eating rock, making soil, digesting pollutants, nourishing and killing plants, surviving in space, inducing visions, producing food, making medicines, manipulating animal behavior, and influencing the composition of the Earth's atmosphere. Fungi provide a key to understanding the planet on which we live, the ways we think, feel, and behave. Yet they live their lives largely hidden from view, and over 90% of their species remain undocumented. The more we learn about fungi, the less makes sense. The less makes sense without them. So, Merlin, what do you mean by this? How come fungi have become such an instrumental part of the way you understand the world?
That's a good question and a big question. So there are lots of ways to think about this. And in some ways, there are some literal senses in which fungi change our surroundings. We have yeasts which change sugar into alcohol, and those products of those transformations change our moods and behaviors when we drink them. So it's just one very simple illustration of how many people are affected in their sensory worlds by fungi all the time. But of course, on an ecological level, there are lots of ways that if you start asking questions, how does this work? How does this change? How does this happen? How does a solid lump of wood become soil? How does soil become in the first place? How does a plant grow? How does a plant sustain itself from the soil? How does a plant acquire what it needs from the ground? All these questions will lead you to fungi before too long. So from an ecological point of view, fungi are everywhere, and they are shaping and guiding the development and the behavior of many organisms, and often out of our sight. And so we tend to ignore them and tend to forget about them. But on another level, they change the way that the patterns and habits of my thought, because they're such unusual organisms compared from our point of view, of course. We have very determined body plans. If you're born with 2 arms, then short of an intervention, you'll end up with 2 arms. But fungi don't have this kind of body plan. They're what we call biologically indeterminate, and you can't ask what shape a fungal network is. It depends entirely on its surroundings. So this fluid development and this sort of call and response with their surroundings, this plasticity, this is a very fascinating aspect of their lives that I find has changed the way that I think about many things.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so So when you're walking in the forest, underneath you, am I right in saying there's a sort of a mycelial network, and mycelial, what's the relationship between like mushrooms and mycelial networks and fungi? Like how do we make sense of those different terms?
That's a very good thing. Let's do that and start there. And so mushrooms are just the fruit of a fungus. So when you see a mushroom poking out of the ground, it's a bit like seeing an apple on an apple tree or a bunch of grapes on a vine. And then you imagine the tree. Imagine if you saw apples poking out of the ground, and then imagine the tree below the surface of the soil, twisting and writhing below the surface of the soil. And it's a bit like that with mushrooms and the rest of the fungus. So if the mushrooms are the fruit, then the rest of the fungus is this network, which we call a mycelial network, or mycelium, which is a fine branching, fusing network of tubular cells. And so fungi are these big fluid networks. And so mushrooms are just the way that they spread their spores. It's a transitory moment in the life of a fungus. And it's usually what we see of these organisms. So these organisms, most of them live out of sight, and they can be huge. These mycelial networks can stretch over kilometers. One of the largest organisms in the world is a mycelial network that ranges over 15 square kilometers in Oregon.
Wow. And they pass like information under the forest, is that right? It's kind of like the internet, I guess, but nature's internet, sharing nutrients and things.
Yeah, so you can think of them as a kind of circulatory system. Like nutrients pass through these networks, but different fungi do different things. And this is a whole kingdom of life. And there's as broad and busy a category as animal or plant. And lots of ways to be an animal, and there are lots of ways to be a fungus. So some fungi decompose dead material. So some fungi rot wood, specialize in rotting wood. And through those fungal networks, you'll have nutrients passing that are the breakdown products of wood. Some fungi live in symbiotic relationships with plants, and they live in their roots, and they extend outwards from their roots, lace outwards in these fine networks. And those fungi receive nutrients from plants, but they then feed plants with minerals from the soil, like nitrogen or phosphorus. And in those cases, you can have different kinds of nutrients passing through the networks underground, and in a different way, because these fungi are connected to living plants rather than dead plants. So it depends. There are many ways to be a fungus. But yes, circulatory system is one way to think of them. Internet is one way to think of them. The internet analogy is limiting, just as in the way that our machine metaphors are often limiting. By thinking about the living world in machine terms, we can start to forget that these are just analogies and stories. And if we think of the life forms as machines, we're more likely to treat them as machines.
Yes, exactly. And I think what's so exciting about your book and about coming to understand this kind of mycelial universe is to understand how deeply interconnected everything is, and like how physically, it is connected as well. And also like how adaptive and expansive nature is. And I think we so often mechanize the world around us and see it as inanimate, as in like we see it lifeless. And I feel that the result of that way of viewing the world, you can see the result in climate change and mass environmental destruction and environmental injustices happening all over the world. So I just think it's a really starting to look at the ground beneath our feet is such a good place to start on like a journey towards re-enchanting our lives and kind of falling deeper in love with our life by kind of understanding the support system that you have around you and how alive that is in nourishing ourselves.
Absolutely. And it's almost seeing negative space. We think about the soil as just the soil, but we're walking, we're afloat on this ocean of soil, this frothing, living wilderness, this huge diversity of life. I think of the soil as the guts of the planet. And there are, in a spoonful, a single teaspoonful of soil, there's anywhere between 10 to 100 kilometers of mycelium. And so these are vast arenas for life and for living and for finding ways to live. And for us to open our eyes to these realms deepens and expands our relationship with our surroundings, because what we thought of previously as not alive becomes alive.
Yeah. And I mean, and also from, I think there's all these really kind of grand ideas of green technologies coming to save us from ourselves and climate change. But, you know, the soil holds, I think, I might be wrong, but I think it's 70% of our carbon is like locked in our soils. And so, you know, rather than kind of growing loads of new forests and a lot of those monoculture crops, I'm all for growing trees, but I mean, the idea that we can do whatever we want to our soils and to our old growth forests and things because we can plant new trees, or that, you know, we're going to come up with these fancy green technologies, actually just looking after like the dirt, it's not dirt, but you know, like the soil and maintaining that and understanding that we are in relationship with the ground and with the soil, but we're not kind of standing above it. And I love how thinking about mushrooms challenges our understanding of what intelligence is, because growing up, personally, I had a very human-centric education, which I'm sure a lot of people have had, whereby, you know, humans are the most intelligent creature on the planet, and kind of everything else around them is not intelligent. Can't even say it. But yet, I remember seeing a sunflower and like watching the way the sunflower would turn its head or face according to where the sun was, and thinking, well, if a sunflower can respond to its environment, surely that means that it's intelligent. That's intelligent life because it's responding to its circumstances. I'd love to know how the study of mycelium mushrooms, fungi, has kind of challenged maybe your preconceived ideas as to what intelligence is and consciousness.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. And so it's and the question of intelligence is a big active debate at the moment, mainly because there are so many ways to think of intelligence. What is intelligence? There are lots of definitions. I find the most helpful way to think of intelligence is to go to the Latin root, which is interlegere, which means to choose between. This idea of choosing between options, you know, having options entail choices, and how do you make those choices? And many organisms have to make choices from a microorganism, from a bacteria, you know, whether it stays in its environment, whether it propels itself over there because the conditions have become too acidic. This happens on a very basic level in life. And fungi are no exception. And they have actually a lot of options to choose between, because their body is a constant question. It's being decided every moment. Do I grow over here? Do I grow over here? Do I pull back from here? Do I thicken this part of the network? How do I juggle the trade-off of absorbing nutrients over here while maintaining a connection to over here in the most efficient way? You know, they solve spatial and geometrical problems astonishingly well. And to the point where people are actually using fungal slime molds as well to solve problems in human life, computational problems of how to best distribute connections within a network, how to most efficiently connect points. And this is the kind of problem that fungi are very good at solving. So the choosing between, and so slime molds have been very helpful here. They're not true fungi, but they're...
What are slime molds? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, slime molds are an organism called Physarum polycephalum, and they're a type of amoeba, and they form one giant cell when times get tough, and they can explore with these yellow tentacle-like veins that they send out, which pulse. And there's no brain, there's no neuron, there's nothing that resembles anything that forms a part of a human brain. And yet they're able to compare different courses of action. They're able to solve complex routing problems. A Japanese research group positioned oats around a dish, and the oats marked urban centers, urban hubs in Tokyo, and they let the slime mold into the dish. And before too long, it had discovered the most efficient route between these hubs and mapped actually the Tokyo subway system.
Wow.
So, this kind of behavior. I have a friend who who keeps slime molds. He keeps a stable of slime molds, and he always would get lost in IKEA stores, and he'd have to ask someone to show him the way out. And so he made a floor plan of his local IKEA store, a kind of maze, and he unleashed the slime molds into the maze. And before long, they'd found their way to the exit along the quickest path.
Wow.
And so he would joke. He said, "Look, they're smarter than me." So these organisms, and fungi are very similar and can solve similar problems. And slime molds are the poster organisms from this kind of behavior because they grow very quickly. And but these kind of behaviors really challenge the way that we think about intelligence, because if we're using slime molds and fungi to solve problems in human life, human problems, designing transport networks according to these networks-based organisms, then it forces us to loosen some of our definitions and to be more generous in the way that we attribute intelligence and cognitive facilities across the living world. And we're stuck in a kind of, I say it's loosening pretty fast right now, but for a long time we've been stuck in a very human-centric model of intelligence where we compare all other life forms to humans. We're at the top of the league tables automatically. We know that in advance. And so we're at the top of the league tables and everything else is compared to humans in a kind of big hierarchy. And it's one way of thinking about it, but it's not a very healthy way of thinking about it. I don't think it helps us at all.
I think it's also, obviously humans have got a very particular kind of intelligence, but also such a stupidity. I feel like our awareness of our ability to have choice has meant that we've often decided to make decisions based on certain ideas that are actually so far removed from what makes us happy or indeed allows us to thrive. So for me, it's like when people talk about countries which are developing as though England or America were a developed country. And yet I really hope that we have quite a long journey of development ahead of us, considering the state that we've got in our ecosystems into. But I think it's really important for us to kind of humble ourselves by understanding that human intelligence, well, the life around us is intelligent as well, and it's adaptive and responding, and we need to learn to be adaptive and responsive to what we're being faced with and the challenges we're being faced with. But I think there's two things. So there's the one side of acknowledging intelligence in the world around us, so that we can respect the world and see it and respect other animals and creatures and life forms and their right to a thriving life, as well as our own right to a thriving life. But then on the other hand, it's also acknowledging the intelligence in life and in natural forms, so that for the challenges that we have, for example, mushrooms and fungi being able to clear up pollution, I think is one thing, or the medicine that's just held in nature. I think humans are kind of burrowing their heads into these kind of into very like non-natural areas to try and find the solutions to things that are actually just around us already. Could you tell me a little bit about how the kind of mushroom kingdom has potentials to help humans get out of this mess?
Yeah, so there are several ways. And in the broadest sense, these are organisms. Fungi have been around for over 1 billion years, and they've lived through many of these, almost all of these great extinction events, of which we're in the 6th. So they've lived through 5 great extinction events. And these are dramatic moments in the history of life, and really dramatic moments. And when the asteroid hit in the extinction about 65 million years ago that wiped out the dinosaurs, it spits debris halfway to the moon. There's dust that blocks out the sun, turns to permanent night for a very long time. Forests across the world die back. You have a giant global compost heap situation. But fungi thrive in this kind of environment, at least many of them do, because they have all this rotting matter to decompose. So that's one example of where you have a calamitous event and these fungi find ways to thrive in that environment. And so we're faced with another extinction event and other things we can learn from these veterans of extinction events to help pull us through. And I think there are many such examples. And one is their ability to digest contaminants or pollutants. And we've been recruiting fungi to digest things for us for a long time. When you make miso, when you make alcohol, any type of fermentation involving a fungus is a kind of what you'd call it's a transformation. We're recruiting a fungus to perform a chemical transformation for us. And so when we do what's called remediation, which is this clearing up of toxic environments, and mycoremediation is remediation with fungi, then it's like the miso barrel or the beer barrel, except that the barrel is the contaminated ecosystem. We're inside it. And so we can extend our existing relationship with fungi to help decontaminate these environments. At least this is the idea, and it's in development, and there are lots of very promising cases and lots of very promising examples of fungi being able to digest contaminants. So that's one active area of research that needs a lot more attention before it can be rolled out on a large scale, but certainly there's a lot of promise. Then there is there are variants on that theme. So there's using bricks of mycelium to filter contaminated water, and can filter out bacterial pathogens or heavy metals. So it's another example of fungi helping to extract these toxic byproducts of our irresponsible behavior. And then there's mycofabrication, which is kind of the opposite. It's reimagining what sort of materials we choose to use in the first place. And these are very promising, and that's actually taking off very quickly. And so it involves growing materials either blocks, sawdust, which you then let the fungus grow through, and then you can bake it into a hard block. And that replaces boards and particle boards and bricks in many building applications. And then, very excitingly, you can make a kind of leather out of fungi, mycelial leather, which you can grow in a week on waste material that would otherwise be thrown away. And you can produce an amazing leather, which is very persuasive leather, looks great, very strong. And this is being used actually in a number of places now. And
have you made it yourself?
I haven't made it myself. I've been to visit the people who do, and it's an amazing thing to see. If you think about getting leather from a cow, you have cut down a forest to make a field, introduce cows, feed them on soybeans for 10 years before you kill. I mean, it's a litany of problems. Whereas this, you have waste from an agricultural farm of some sort that was otherwise be thrown away. You get the waste. So it's a win for the waste producer. It's a win for the cultivator, for the leather maker, and it's a win for the fungus, a win-win-win. And you have leather grown in a week so it's a kind of recruiting the fungus to perform a recycling act, which of course they do all the time. They're the great recyclers of the planet. So it's a kind of domestication of recycling. So it's and very, very promising.
That's really cool. And what about mushrooms and in medicine? Because isn't penicillin a type of fungi? It's my understanding that there is more scientific research happening now to look back into perhaps the relationship between medicines and fungi since like the war on drugs and that kind of slowing the whole process down.
Yes, so there are lots of medicinal uses of fungi. So penicillin comes from a fungus called Penicillium, which is a type of mold. And the fungi have to fight off infections too. They have to spend their life defending themselves from bacteria, from viruses, just as we do. And so they produce defenses. They're very good at producing defenses. They're metabolically ingenious. They're masters of the art of chemical transformation. And so in their battle against bacteria and viruses, they produce all these compounds that we can then use and turn out to work for us as well. So penicillin's a good example, produced by a fungus to fight bacteria, but we can use that fungal solution and rehouse it within our own bodies and use this fungal chemical to fight bacterial infections within us. So there are lots of similar examples. I mean, mushrooms have been used for thousands of years in many parts of the world for a whole range of afflictions. And right now there are lots of exciting anti-cancer drugs coming out of the fungal world, antiviral drugs coming out of the fungal world. And Paul Stamets, who's an amazing mycologist, has found that certain antiviral compounds produced by mushrooms are able to reduce colony collapse disorder in honeybees. which is obviously a major problem that we're facing. So a fungal solution to a bee problem, and that's based on the ability of these fungi to produce antivirals, which work in humans too. So it's, we share problems with other members of the living world, and we share solutions with other members of the living world. And fungi are prodigious composers of these solutions.
Yeah, that's amazing. I watched this documentary. What's it called? Fantastic Fun. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Fantastic Fungi. Thank you. I watched it the other week, and it was really, really inspiring documentary. And I'd love to know about. So you have kind of fungi to help with kind of physical illnesses, and what about mental illnesses as well, and about the way fungi affects the brain. Some of my friends are taking lion's mane because apparently that helps rewire the brain or something.
Yeah, so lion's mane it produces something called nerve growth factor, which stimulates nerve growth, and there's a lot of research into it right now as to what exactly it will be. It can be used to treat. I take it every day as a general tonic, and I feel more alert and better for it, and so I enjoy it. And it also tastes great. If you fry it, if you have fresh lion's mane, you can fry it. It's just like crab or lobster. And so lion's mane is one medicinal mushroom that has a lot of promise for treating these neural problems. Cerebral neural problems.
So that would be something like Alzheimer's, right? So is a neural problem.
And I don't know of any studies that have confirmed this. I know people who use it to treat Alzheimer's, and I'm not sure how those projects are turning out, but there's a lot of promise for sure. And psilocybin is another one. Psilocybin stimulates nerve growth. And this is the material, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. And so it's in small doses, it stimulates nerve growth. So you could take psilocybin, people are doing research into this right now, and stimulate nerve growth without taking enough psilocybin to have a full-blown psychedelic experience. Of course, having a full-blown psychedelic experience has also been shown recently to be very good for mental problems such as depression or anxiety following diagnosis of terminal illnesses.
Yeah.
Because it can somehow loosen the rigid habits of our minds and allow us to approach familiar problems from new angles. And it's that loosening of the grips of our habits that seems to be the way that it allows people to escape these cerebral shackles.
Yeah.
Somehow, these ways that they're fixed and held rigid in these various types of problem. So psilocybin is a major promising fungal substance right now, and always has been, of course. But
I'm excited to see how the studies that are going on in those areas, how they come out. Just to be clear that the way that you're speaking about it, that a lot of that's kind of to be done in a safe container, in a safe environment, isn't it? Like the therapeutic use of psychedelics for mental health is like with being kind of guided through that process for a lot of people. What I find really cool is to think about the way mycelial networks connect the forest and kind of share messages and nutrients. And so I like the idea of taking something like lion's mane, which isn't psychoactive, and the way that it can kind of rewire my brain. I often find, falling into a depression, like you said, it's like a cerebral shackles, you kind of get stuck in a particular groove and a way of seeing the world and having, something natural that can kind of help rewire the brain and tie bits back together that seem to have become disconnected. I just like thinking of it as like a forest floor. Yeah. Did you want to show a video of a root?
I did, and it's just a very good way to get a sense of the intimacy of these associations that fungi form. We talk about them now in this kind of abstract way, but actually these are very intimate relationships. And so I have these laser scans of plant roots where you can see the plant is artificially colored in blue, and the fungus is coloured in red. And you can turn down the plant to reveal the fungus within it, and you can zoom around within the three-dimensional space. And I found this amazing way to get a sense, get a feeling for these organisms and get a feeling for these relationships that they undertake. And so these relationships with plants and the fungi and their roots, this underpins all of our food chains, that sustain us and to sustain everything that we depend on. So if plants weren't nourished by these fungi, we wouldn't have recognizable plants today. And so life on land would not be what it is today. So these are really, this moment of contact between plant and fungus is fundamental. And so this is what I wanted to show you, this journey into a root.
Yes,
so I'm just going to share my screen here. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Great. So the plant's in blue and the fungus is in red. And now you'll see.
Wow.
So you can see how densely inhabited by fungus this root is.
Yeah.
The fungus is really a different organ of the plant. And the plant is in some sense an organ of the fungus. But this is not a casual relationship. Here we can take a trip inside.
Whoa.
And you see that there's all this space in the middle of the root. This is where the plant would have the vessels it uses to conduct nutrients and water. But what we're now in the place where the plant tissue would be. But it's a very intricately managed and formalized relationship. This isn't just a casual infection.
Wow, that's really cool.
Here's the up again.
Oh, thank you for showing that. Did you create that footage?
Yes, with the help of some amazing colleagues in Germany who developed that technique. Yeah.
And because I know that you're really interested in the relationships between humans and non-humans, and I guess, well, not non-humans, like the more than human. Can you tell me a little bit about why that area interests you so much, about the way we understand our relationships?
Yeah. So I suppose I'm interested in the boundaries of ourselves. Like, where do we start and stop? And when we have these relationships with other animals and with plants and with fungi and microbes, this question is raised in very vivid detail. We have all these microbes living inside us, more than we have our own cells, in fact. And without these microbes living inside us, these bacteria and these fungi, we wouldn't grow and develop and behave as we do. So what we call ourselves is really this community, this ecology. And I just find that so thrilling and exciting. And it changes the way that I think about myself. And it changes the way that I think about others. And it changes the way that I think about my relationships to the world around me. And so this sort of leaks out from there. And so, for example, the flowers these orchids that look like female bees to attract male bees, and the male bees are attracted to the flowers because they look like female bees, and there's a kind of erotic encounter between the plant world and the animal world, and this has been arisen over thousands and thousands of years of evolutionary time. And truffles, for example, they have this amazing scent. These fungi, these fruiting bodies of these fungi underground, they smell irresistible to so many types of animal. And the truffle is a kind of portrait in scent of animal fascination that has evolved again over thousands of years. And so when we see these relationships written in to the biology of the environment that we live in, to the ecosystems that surround us, we see ourselves also written in to the ecosystems that surround us. We fall into being a part of our surroundings. We're this open circuit joined in our surroundings. We're in moment-to-moment relationship with our surroundings. And these ideas I find very astonishing. And you see this in the biological world in the form of these relationships, which I described, the ones between humans and more than humans. And I think that's why this little moment of interaction is so fascinating for me.
Yeah, wow, that's kind of blowing my mind about there being about like the organisms that are within us. But I guess also we kind of, like forget how like sensual life is, and that like you can feel, you can see, you can smell, you can hear, you can taste, and humans rely so much on eyesight, that so many of our other senses kind of are really dampened. But yeah, I love that idea of kind of acknowledging like how it's like how like the constant exchanges there are between like ourselves and the world around us, like that are constantly happening even if we're not very conscious of it. That's really amazing. And I'd like to ask you, because you have researched, so studied the history and the philosophy of science. How has that, because to a lot of people and to myself, that's quite an interest. I mean, most people would say that I study science, but to study like the philosophy of science and the history and development of science, how has that informed the way that you kind of come to study the world around you and ecology and mycelium?
I find it really helpful. And I've always found it really helpful to think about how we know. How do we go about knowing? And too often in the practices of the sciences, people are taught certain methods and approaches which one then takes for granted. This is how we do this. This is how we approach this type of problem. This is how we apply this type of technology to answer this kind of question. But it's easy to forget that these methods and approaches have arisen over time for various reasons, some commercial, some political, some ideological, and some none of those things. And that the things we choose, the way we choose to ask and answer questions, those choices are choices. And if we think about how we make those choices, we could sometimes make other choices. And that helps to think more broadly about how we know and the things that we know and the way that we choose to know and what we choose to ask about. And it's also fascinating, if you want to know something about a certain type of ladybird, you go and ask the ladybird expert. If you want to know something about a certain type of galaxy, you'd ask an astronomer. And if you want to know something about a type of protein, you'd ask a biochemist. But if you want to know something about science, you'd ask someone who studies science, for whom science is their subject matter. And for that, you'd ask an anthropologist, a sociologist, a historian, or a philosopher of science. So there's a sense in which scientists don't study science itself. They study their subject matter from within science. And so it's very amazing to read and to study and to talk with these people who are studying science itself and the practices and methods and approaches of science. And are taking the claims of science and turning them into questions rather than answers in advance.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, very important to talk about how we talk about things.
Yeah, I agree, because I think it's very important at this moment in time, as we are faced with a climate and ecological crisis, to become very curious about how we've gotten ourselves into this position and how we can get ourselves out, and really ask, like, the things that we're being confronted with need us to be asking the deeper questions so we can find deeper responses and answers, and understanding that kind of the way in which we approach science is also a product of our culture, I think is really, really important. I read your dad's book when I was at school, and that really kind of, so The Science Delusion, and that really just kind of rocked my world as a 17-year-old, because I had just read Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, which had really upset my world. But I didn't know how to kind of answer back to it. And so, it was a real relief when I read your dad's book. That was an amazing response to that, looking at the kind of some of the inadequacies in the way in which we think of science as dogma rather than as a means to exploring like the incredible world that's around us. I'd love to ask one more question, and that's just going back to your brilliant book that you've just written, which was released in the States yesterday, am I right? That's and going to be released in the UK in September. And is it going to be, are you going to have an international release? Do you know? I mean, as in other countries?
Yeah, absolutely. It's sold in 15 countries. So in October, in September and October, it should be coming out in many European countries and China and Japan as well, and lots of places.
Brilliant. And what do you hope people will kind of get from reading your book? Why did you want to write the book?
I think there are three things. One is that it's so easy for us to pass over these organisms, fungi, and to take them for granted, to be blind to them. And what we're blind to, we're bound to disregard or destroy. And we can't afford to do that with these organisms because they're too important. So part of it is to alleviate people's fungus blindness. And another part is because fungi are interconnected organisms, they form literal connections between organisms. And so they embody this principle of ecology, which is the relationships between organisms. And they draw you into this web of connections and this frothing, seizing web of connections in which we're inextricably embedded. And so part of the project of the book is to try and open up that world more and to allow people to feel this sense of interconnection in a very real way. And then there's the point that fungi change the way that we think and imagine. And I found it so helpful to think about these organisms and to let it loosen these concepts and categories that I use to organize the world. And so there's a sense in which I hope that it would help people to think differently in an everyday way about some very basic assumptions that we take for granted.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I hope everyone does go and read the book, because such a big part of EcoResolution and the work that we're doing is kind of to try and spread the message that we're deeply embedded, in this like beautiful web of existence. And I think to be daily reminded of that kind of fills one with so much more motivation in order to protect that web of existence that we all rely upon. And I think the story of separation, whereby we are isolated beings in a mechanistic world, is really fueling not just the ecological crisis, but also our inability to really step up in order to confront it and to build and support and co-create alternative ways. And instead, as an isolated mechanistic being, we kind of go into shutdown because we don't feel like we have I feel like it means that we don't feel like we have the kind of support and the collectivity, the resilience and the adaptability in order to confront these challenges. And I really feel like your work is exposing how we totally are able to do that, because, in the same way that like mycelial networks can respond and adapt according to the circumstances that they're faced with, like we're problem solvers and just basically wanting to thrive. So thank you so much, Merlin. Thank you for your time today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.